Well, I'm going to do this video, and it's going to highlight Megyn Kelly's interview with an NRA executive. To her credit, Megyn really didn't take sides, which is a bit unusual. She seemed to be fairly even in her questioning, but she didn't press her guest. Now, I want you to pay close attention to her guest, who's a representative of the NRA. And I'm going to ask you honestly, if you were trying to have a discussion with this guy, how do you think it would go? Because in my opinion, this guy was not willing to even talk about anything that would help as far as gun violence was concerned. And he pretty much stated as much. President Obama has indicated that he's invited the NRA to the White House multiple times, and each time he invites them, they refuse his invitation. To me, that does not speak to someone willing to sit down and sensibly discuss something. It just says that they're going to be in-transient in their actions, and they're just letting you know up front. But here is the Megyn Kelly interview, and then several other commentaries from various Fox hosts. Some of them were pretty much even keel, but their legal analyst was, he was a bit foxy, i.e. biased.
Breaking tonight, the president defends his new gun rules in a national town hall and challenges the NRA.
There's a reason why the NRA is not here. They're just down the street. And since this is the main reason they exist, you'd think that they'd be prepared to have a debate with the president.
They haven't been to the White House for years.
We've invited them. We've invited them.
So right now, tonight, you're saying you would be welcome to meet with them?
We have invited them repeatedly.
And now in a Kelly File exclusive, the National Rifle Association responds for the first time to President Obama's direct challenge and to his new push for more gun control. Welcome to the Kelly File, everyone. I'm Megyn Kelly. In moments, we will be joined by Chris Cox, the executive director of the NRA's Institute for Legislative Action, in an exclusive. But first, President Obama taking part in an event the White House is calling a town hall on the campus of a Washington, D.C. university. In the last year of his presidency, with his legacy potentially on the line, the president issuing a new challenge to the country to reconsider one of the most cherished American rights to some extent, the Second Amendment, the right to bear arms. We have got a huge and important lineup for you tonight on this, on the political and the legal fallout from the president's executive action, and what this means for the gun rights of all Americans. Judge Andrew Napolitano is our Fox News senior judicial analyst. Mark Thiessen is a former speechwriter for President George W. Bush. Bill Burton is the former White House deputy press secretary under President Obama. But first, here is some of what President Obama said, including when Mr. Obama suggested that the NRA profits off of misleading the American public.
Every year we're losing 30,000 people to gun violence. And if we take that number from 30,000 down to, let's say, 28,000, that's 2,000 families who don't have to go through what the families at Newtown or San Bernardino or Charleston went through. Historically, the NRA was in favor of background checks. Historically, many in the Republican Party were in favor of background checks. And what's changed is not that my proposals are particularly radical. What's changed is we've suddenly created an atmosphere in which I put out a proposal like background checks, or after Sandy Hook, we're calling on Congress, along with people like Gabby Gifford, who herself was a victim of gun violence. We put out a proposal that is common sense, modest, does not claim to solve every problem, is respectful of the Second Amendment, and the way it is described is that we're trying to take away everybody's guns. Every time there's a mass shooting, gun sales spike. And part of the reason is that the NRA is convinced, many of its members, that somebody's going to come grab your guns, which is, by the way, really profitable for the gun manufacturers. It's a great advertising mechanism, but it's not necessary.
And we begin tonight with our Kelly File exclusive. The NRA's Chris Cox with his organization's first response to President Obama. Chris, thank you so much for being here. So let's start with the notion that he wants to meet with you. He went on to say, if only you'll put aside your rhetoric and what he seemed to be describing as straw men when it comes to gun issues. Are you prepared to meet with him?
Well, Megyn, let's be clear what this is really about. This president's trying to create an illusion that he's doing something to keep people safe. He needs to do that because the truth is his policies have failed miserably. We saw that materialize itself in San Bernardino when we had a terrorist attack. This president didn't use it as an opportunity to unite this country. He didn't use it as an opportunity to lay out a plan to defeat terrorism. He used it as an opportunity to impose more gun control on law-abiding Americans.
He's treating that as a case of gun violence as well.
Exactly. This is an attempt to distract the American people away from his failed policies. So, did we participate in CNN's event tonight? No, we didn't. We were offered one pre-screened question. Megyn, I know that you don't send your questions over to the White House, so I'd rather have a conversation with you that's intellectually honest than sit through a lecture and get one opportunity to ask a pre-screened question.
Does it make sense?
And that's disingenuous because what better way to sit down and ask a whole bunch of questions and try to get a bunch of answers than having a face-to-face with the president. But obviously that wasn't what they were interested in.
With him?
Well, and talk about what, Megyn? This president can talk about background checks all day long, but that's nothing more than a distraction away from the fact that he can't keep us safe, and he supported every gun control proposal that's ever been made. He doesn't support the individual right to own a firearm. That's been the position of his Supreme Court nominees. That's been the position of his administration. So what are we going to talk about? Basketball? I'm not really interested in going over and talking to the president who doesn't have a basic level of respect or understanding of the Second Amendment and law-abiding gun owners in this country.
Here's what he said. Tonight he tried to say this, that there's not an area of our lives that we don't make a little safer. He talked about little toys for children that they could choke on. He talked about cars and seatbelt laws. And he said to not apply that same principle to guns would be inconsistent.
Megyn, this president would have the American people believe that in order to love your children, you have to hate your firearms.
That's not true.
Only offensive, it's disgusting. This president would have you believe that somehow we don't care about keeping our kids safe. Gun owners in this country do more, and the National Rifle Association does more to teach safe and responsible gun ownership than this president ever has or ever will.
When he talks about the gun show loophole, which is what his executive action is trying to get at, among other things, and he went on to say that that's a massive loophole and that people have exploited it to avoid background checks, and sometimes those guns have wound up being used in murders.
Megyn, the San Bernardino murderer had something in common with the Santa Barbara murder and the Tucson murder and the Aurora murder and the Chattanooga, the Charleston, the Southern Virginia. All of them went through President Obama's background check, and every one of them passed.
Mm-hmm. That's a lie. The guys that did that shooting in San Bernardino did not go through background checks. Their in-law was the one who went through the background checks, and then he in turn gave those weapons to the San Bernardino murderers. So that's bullshit.
Every one of those murderers passed this background check.
It's a huge
so we can
problem.
talk about it's 0.7%, according to Barack Obama's Justice Department. 0.7% of criminals obtain their firearms through gun shows. 0.7%.
That's an unbelievable stat, the way you listed it there, that all of those murderers went through and passed the background check. He was sort of asked about that, and you saw Paul Babot, the sheriff out in Arizona, get up there and say, none of your measures would have prevented any of these mass shootings, right? None of them. And President Obama said, look, mental health problems are real. Violent crime is real. We're not going to stop at either of those entirely in this country, which is that's not realistic. He said the question is, can we make it less lethal when it happens? And he cited an example that he cited the other day out of China. Right around the time Newtown happened, it was 2010, a guy took a knife, guns are banned over there, it stabbed 23 children, not one died, because he didn't have a semi-automatic rifle, is what the president said.
Megyn, this president in his 8th year has decided he wants to talk about doing something about prosecutions in this country. He has overseen a 40% decrease a 40% decrease in the prosecution of criminal misuse of firearms. At the same time, as if that's not bad enough, he's going back and releasing armed criminals who have been successfully prosecuted and sent to jail.
That's a
This
lie.
president's lost all credibility because he's no longer credible to speak to the issues of law-abiding gun owners.
All right.
Now, the 40%, or 40, actually it's 44% decrease in prosecutions is due to the fact that Congress has reduced the ATF's budget dramatically, and they have suffered a massive number of ATF agent reductions, and Obama is basically trying to get those numbers back up by attempting to hire an additional 200 ATF officers. So again, he is giving out misinformation, and I can't really blame Megyn Kelly for not being able to counter it, because that's not really Fox's job. But thus far, she's doing a fairly decent job.
Last question, Chris. He brought up Newtown, which is moving to every American with a heart. And he cried the other day at the White House and talking about Newtown, and it's not tough to figure out why. You know, when you think back to the children, the 6-year-olds who were murdered by some lunatic that day, the face of evil. And he said it was the only time in his presidency he's ever seen the Secret Service cry when they went to Newtown days after. One of the worst days of my presidency. What is your solution? How do you say we prevent another Newtown?
Well, Megyn, the president doesn't have a monopoly on compassion in this country. The president doesn't have a monopoly on loving and caring about kids. The president doesn't get to lecture us on loving our kids and caring about our kids. This president has done nothing to keep us safe. His policies have been a failure from start to finish. The National Rifle Association believes that we should protect our kids in our schools the same way we protect our president, our politicians, our athletes, and our money at our banks. And that's with armed security officers. Armed security officers protecting our kids at school. At the same time, we can do something about mental health. Megyn, you and I have been on this show talking about the need for mental health reform. This president in year 8 has decided he wants to have a conversation. Welcome to the party. The National Rifle Association has been trying to have this conversation for years. So have Republicans in Congress who tried to do something meaningful, but this president was more interested in defeating the NRA than defeating crime, defeating a mental health problem, and ultimately defeating terrorism. It's a shame, but it's what we've come to expect out of this president.
Up until just now, where the president's pushing for more money on mental health, the vice president was quoted by a lawmaker saying that they're not interested in that. They're tabling that for now. Chris, I got to run. I thank you for being here tonight.
Now, that wasn't true either, but let's get back to his comment about armed security officers in every single school. The cost of that would be astronomical, but there is a way to fund that. You add an additional tax to every firearm sold in the country, and you basically would probably have to add a $10 to $20 per firearm tax in order to try to partially fund the cost of having armed security officers at every single school in the country. And even at $25 tax for every firearm sold, it probably wouldn't get close. But again, he's talking about nothing being done. Nothing's being done because Congress refuses to negotiate, just like the NRA refuses to negotiate. Now you're going to get Mr. Napolitano, who can't stand the street that Obama walks on. But in the interest of fairness, we need to hear what he has to say.
Thank you.
Joining me now with more, Judge Andrew Napolitano. When you listen to the president through the tears and Raising Newtown talk about it, it sounds simple, right? Like, of course, we need to do more to protect children. When you hear the other side, you're reminded of how complicated this issue really is when you actually look at the cold, hard facts.
The president was not being intellectually honest tonight, Megyn, because the president kept referring to my proposal, my proposal, my proposal. Every one of those proposals was rejected by the Congress. The Congress writes the laws, not the president. Yet the president has offered in his speech on Tuesday of this week to enact these into law via executive order and executive authority. Basically,
It's the same thing that happened with immigration.
correct. And the courts stopped him with respect to immigration and basically said you can't change the immigration laws, and they will stop him with respect to this. The issue is not the wisdom of what he wants to do. The issue is the authority. He does not have the authority to change the law, no matter how noble his goals may be, and he understands that.
Not even around the edges. I mean, this is like tighten the loophole that allows the the gun sales in certain cases.
If Congress had remained silent on it, and the president wanted to try to regulate an area of congressional silence, there's some authority in constitutional jurisprudence that would let him wade in there. But Congress has not been silent. What he failed to say at that town hall meeting tonight is that Congress rejected his proposals 3 times during his presidency, including when Congress was controlled by the Democrats in the first 2 years.
That's right.
He cannot overcome the will of Congress by rewriting the law.
And that's the problem, because Congress is overriding the will of the people who want universal background checks. And Obama has been, true enough, defeated 3 times on his attempt to get the background checks, but because he has the ability to issue executive orders and Congress hasn't issued any counter proposals or any type of legislation in order to try to control gun violence, he felt like he had to act, and he did so. And Napolitano is being disingenuous by not stating that the other side of that coin, which is, where is Congress on proposing gun legislation?
He's a prince rather than a president.
Judge, thank you.
You're welcome.
Joining us now with more, Mark Thiessen, Fox News contributor and former chief speechwriter to President George W. Bush, along with Bill Burton, former White House deputy press secretary to President Obama. Guys, thank you both so much for being here. I thought it was a very thoughtful hour. And to CNN's credit, they put a lot of pro-gun people in the audience, including Taya Kyle, the widow of the American sniper, and a woman, do we have the soundbite, who herself had been the victim of gun violence. Here she is challenging the president.
Why can't your administration see that these restrictions that you're putting to make it harder for me to own a gun or harder for me to take that where I need to be is actually just making my kids and I less safe?
There's nothing that we've proposed that would make it harder for you to purchase a firearm.
And therein lies the rub. The president says that. His doubters don't believe that. And there were some powerful testimonials there tonight, Mark. I'll start with you, on the importance of guns to people's lives, as well as the damage guns have done.
No, absolutely. I mean, President Obama finally got to meet some of those Americans who cling to guns for the first time in his presidency. I mean, at the White House, he got to surround himself with victims who agree with him, because the White House gets to vet everybody, as Bill knows. It's CNN's credit. They picked up a lot. They invited a lot of people who were victims of violent crime, who had lost loved ones to gun violence, who did not agree with the president and challenged him. I'm glad the NRA didn't go.
And to the president's credit, he sat there and answered them.
Absolutely. Give the president credit for going in there. I don't think that was the event he was expecting. But I think, give him credit. I think he was very respectful in his answers, but he struggled with it. I mean, it's much harder to face the victim, someone like Taya Kyle, who lost a husband to gun violence, and she says, why are gun prosecutions down 44% under your administration? Or a rape victim who says that you're trying to make it harder for me. Or he had to finally meet a gun shop owner who explained to him how hard these people work to keep the guns out of the hands of bad people. And who they said to him, why don't you instead of hiring more people for background checks, why don't you hire 200 more ATF agents to go get the bad guys that we're trying to keep guns out of the hands of? So it was a very different event.
On that last question, Bill, you could sense the president's frustration that he'd love to have more ATF agents, but he can't get the funding for that, and the ATF is very busy.
Right, and Congress has stood in the way every step of the way. I mean, look, on the gun store owners, I thought it was amazing that he could stand there and say, we're doing such a good job, when the other side of that argument is all of these guns that are committing all of these crimes are purchased legally.
The guns that are used
from those gun store owners. Right, so, look, I think it was a mistake for the NRA not to go, but when you listen to Cox, who was on your show just now, you can see why they didn't. They don't have a meaningful response to what do we actually do in response to the gun violence in this country.
But Bill, when you heard him tick through all of those mass murders and all the murderers passing the background checks that are on the books, I mean, it's a powerful argument that these nips around the edges aren't going to do anything. I mean, like, the laws around the books have not done anything, and these nips around the edges aren't going to do anything. And they raise questions about whether more gun laws are the answer.
But Megyn, the answer is not to do nothing. It cannot be. When Americans are slaughtering Americans.
Why can't it be $1 billion
at my son's nursery school,
locking people up more
after
easily?
Newtown, at my son's nursery school, they added a second latch to the gate when you walk in because they didn't want people to be able to just walk in and fire guns. If my son's nursery school can do something, Congress ought to do something. And if it's mental health, get in the game, NRA. The president's got a proposal. Democrats have been pushing mental health but Republicans block it time and time again.
No,
they want to do mental health. Now's the time to do it.
Joe Biden just said that this was not going to be the priority for the White House right now.
Why did he say that, though?
What? Had how many years now since Newtown, Mark? How many years to prioritize mental health?
2012.
It hasn't happened. I'm not saying that's necessarily the silver bullet, pardon, the term, either. But if we're so outraged about the guns, where's the outrage about the mental health in this country? And what we see happening on a progressive level, 9 times out of 10, it's some young man in his early 20s who's had some sort of a psychotic break, and there are usually some signs that preceded it, Mark.
Megyn,
and there's a lack of
the president supports mental health. It's Republicans.
Hold on, Bill. I'll come to you. Go ahead, Mark.
And the other thing is Bill saying what should be done. Maybe the president ought to not be presiding over a 40% reduction in prosecution of gun crimes under existing gun laws. I mean, he wrote in the New York Times today that there is a crisis of gun violence, yet under his administration, according to Syracuse University study, 40% down compared to George W. Bush 10 years ago in terms of gun prosecutions. So either the president, if there is really an epidemic of gun violence, then the president is not doing his job. But the fact is, he had to face Tally Kyle saying no. There is a record low, a 44-year low of gun crimes in this country.
Go ahead, Bill.
Well, first of all, I know that it was said that we should celebrate that. I don't think that gun violence in this country, at the level that it's at, is anything to be celebrated.
The president agreed with her. The president had no problem with the way
I don't agree. I don't agree. And
second of all,
the enforcement isn't down because of the president's budget. It's because Republicans cut enforcement time and time again. That's why the president added 200 folks to the ATF. Yeah, really. That's why the president added 200 folks to the ATF to go. That's why the president added 200 folks to the ATF so they can go out and enforce the laws. That's the point, largely, of what he did on Tuesday in order to do something.
No, it's his Justice
to combat gun
Department.
violence.
It's his Justice Department. It's 40% down from George W. Bush 10 years ago.
I gotta leave it at that. Thank you.
Yeah, and like the gentleman on the right said, yeah, the enforcement is down because the number of ATF agents is down. And to make matters even worse, Congress will not even confirm a head of the ATF, so that further exacerbates the problems. So I know I'm going to get a bunch of feedback on this one, but just had to make this video.